Salutations, everyone! Welcome back to another Total Warhammer 3 guide. I'm Lord Forwind, and this time we are going to cover the Exiles of Khorne, the Khornite faction, for Immortal Empires. Skarbrand the Exiled. So, first off, thanks for watching. If you haven't done so, please do like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. And let's get right into it. So the first things we're going to cover are the faction, how they play. Then we'll go into their units, dissecting how to play them in battle and to plan out your army. Then we'll hit up on the economy, which is very important for this faction. Then we'll cover technology. And then finally, we will cover starting moves for Skarbrand. And that should all be chaptered below, so you can jump to what section you're interested in. Okay, so Exiles of Khorne. Skulls for the Skull Throne, Blood for the Blood God, all of that. If you're looking for an iconic Warhammer type chant, this is what the faction is known for. The Exiles of Khorne are a pretty much purely fighting faction. If you were going to try and do true total war or an achievement where you have to fight everyone in the world, this is probably one of the factions that really wouldn't change that much from your actual gameplay as to whether or not you decide to fight everybody at the same time. They are all about fighting. They're all about killing. They're all about conquering. They're not about expanding, which makes them rather strange. In some ways, they're almost like the Wood Elves in that sense, which is, now that I think of it, rather weird. Khorne has, well, roughly kind of 3 or 4 mechanics that really matter. So let's get into those. First one being one of the Chaos God factions. You have access to the Unholy Manifestations, which as Khorne corruption spreads across the world, this meter will fill up based off the total amount. You can execute these various different manifestations, and they come with different effects. This one I will mention now is particularly nice. It's relatively cheap. You get it basically whenever it comes off cooldown. It summons an army to attack your army, basically. It's particularly useful to get money, but also to get skulls, which we will cover later. Plus, it allows you to fight multiple battles, which has another mechanic that the Exiles of Khorne desperately have trouble with and desperately need to work around. Next one, huge boost of movement range. It's great, especially if you want to cover ground quickly. And then finally, skulls from kills. You get skulls after every battle, even if you lose battles. This boosts it higher. And then finally, you can raise a settlement. Your units can't move, but you get 10,000 skulls. If you get to this point, you probably don't need those skulls, to be honest. You've probably conquered the vast majority of the world. So in my opinion, it's probably one of the most useless unholy manifestations in the game. So we've talked a little bit about skulls. Let's talk about it more. So Khorne has access to your normal cash. In this case, it's favor, but your normal cash supply. But also skulls are the other currency. The Khorne faction here uses these skulls for a variety of things. You get them from battles, combat trials, events, kills, raising settlements. Skull piles will appear around the map. They show up as a little picture of 2 skulls in the air. If you walk over them, you'll pick them up. You use them to occupy settlements and to buy technology. The buying of the technology, in my opinion, is the harder thing rather than the occupying settlements. But it does mean Khorne has a very odd way of expanding, and we'll get into that. But before we do, let's talk about this bloodletting mechanic. So the Khornite factions are sustained by slaughter. This is definitely, in some ways, one of the darkest factions in Total Warhammer. They're all about killing. As you fight more battles and win them within a period of time, usually 2 turns, so you really want to stack winning a series of battles in a row, you will get various bonuses that will go up to the point that your settlements will grow fast, your upkeep is cheap, you'll replenish, you get Khornite corruption, recruiting troops globally is cheap. However, fail to fight battles and you will fall down to the bottom where bloodletting is inactive. You'll lose growth in your provinces, your melee attack will go down. This applies for each army, which can be quite annoying playing this faction because if you get a second army, you have to have that second army constantly fighting, and the effects are basically added together. So if one army is winning battles and the other one's sitting idle, by and large, they're going to cancel each other out to some degree, especially the growth. And I just want to point this out right now. You do not have a growth building as the Khorne faction here. You don't get one, which means the only way you're going to get growth really is from fighting battles. You'll get, you'll get 5 from buildings, which is just your capital settlement, basically. And then outside of that, you have to win and have stack bloodletting to actually grow your settlements. This is one reason it could actually be worth flipping from a dimensional breach to a dark bastion in your starting region at some point, just because of the 5 growth. And trust me, it's rather pathetic that 5 growth matters, but it does for this faction. So if we were to move forward in time, which we will here in a moment, we're going to merge this army in. We're going to fight this battle here, just so I can show you what the results are. So I'm just going to auto-resolve it, because you can. So first off, you have this Horn of Khorne, an army ability that you will get with kills and stuff. It is a huge boost to your combat strength. So if you fight battles manually rather than auto-resolve, be aware that this exists and you want to use it. So we will win. Afterwards, we have a couple different options. We have get money, heal your host, or gain skulls. Plus, you get skulls from fighting the battle, so it's actually more than that. And you get a fair amount of loot from it. So by and large, as this faction, you're probably going to want a lot of the time get the army replenishment. Now, Skarbrand does have armies replenishing in foreign territory, so you don't have to keep retreating to your lands to heal. The only reason you retreat to your lands is to recruit units cheaper. And that is what you would want to do afterwards. So let's jump forward a turn or two here, and so I can show you the occupation options for this province. Okay, here we are next turn. I just recruited a couple bloodletters. So we can reach this province, and we will. But let's talk about another mechanic before we get there. This is tributes to the Skull Throne. Basically, the Khorne factions take the skulls of their defeated enemies and give them to the Chaos God Khorne in return for blessing and making Khorne stronger. Khorne is the strongest of the Chaos Gods, but abhors magic, so don't expect to see magic here. But this you can activate every once in a while, and it will give you a huge movement range, income from battles, cheaper, quicker construction time. It will give you an army ability, which will allow you to summon 2 units of bloodletters in combat, and when you create a blood host, you'll get 2 units on creation. We're going to talk about blood hosts in a moment, but for now, you're probably going to want to pay this tribute when you can. Be aware that it is very expensive for your skull supply, so you're not going to be able to use it every time you want to. But in this case, at the beginning of the game, good time to use it. Easy victory here. Now, you'll see very different options here compared to a normal faction. The first one, the standard one, is to sack it. You can sack the settlement, you'll get a good chunk of change and some unit replenishment. By and large, if you're short on money, which you will be at points with this faction, this is probably the one you're going to want to do. Then you have an occupy, which unlike other factions comes with a cost. If you want to occupy this, you have to pay 2,500 skulls. This is consistent. Every province you take, if you try and occupy it, it will cost you a huge chunk of skulls. Now, there are ways around that, paying that skull cost, and we will talk about them. But let's get the other options. First, this is skulls for the Skull Throne. This is a raise option. You destroy it, you take 1,000 skulls. So as you can imagine, if you sack and raise 3 settlements, you'll have enough skulls, or usually 2 because you get some from battles, to occupy a province. This means if you're going to try and move into an area, by and large, you probably want to raise the 2 minor settlements if it's a 3 settlement province, and then occupy the capital, and you'll balance out the skull cost that way. This also applies if you try and colonize ruins on your own. You still have to pay this skull cost as well. And then the final one, and the one that you're going to be using a lot, is blood for the blood god rather than skulls for the skull throne, where you will get replenishment, but most importantly, you will get the effect blooded. You will summon a blood host. Plus, you'll get winds of magic, but the blood host is the key part here. So before we continue any further, I'll just point out the fact that the Khornite factions are a demonic faction, so they do require to have some half decent winds of magic. Higher, better, low penalties. There we go. As you can see, if it's low, low casualty, physical resistance, leadership. If it's high, Joe, I can't show it to you easily. Suffice to say, it's pretty. Oh, there it is. You move further, and you have spell resistance. All Khornite units have spell resistance, so it makes them even harder to kill with magic. But we summoned a Blood Host here, and remember we did Skull Throne, so we got an additional 2 units. Otherwise, you'd summon a much smaller Blood Host. So a Blood Host, summoned from beyond, Horn of Khorne, standard stuff. The key part is a Blood Host has an upkeep cost, and I want to point this out because there's other effects, but the upkeep cost is something you need to be aware of. You cannot raise Blood Hosts willy-nilly. They cost a fair chunk of change. You'll notice our income has gone negative because we raised a Blood Host, which means for this first battle, you might have been better off raising the settlement. But Blood Hosts are very powerful. You've got 4 turns. If you don't fight a battle and you have to initiate the battle with this army, it cannot be a supporting army in the battle. If you don't, it will start taking attrition, and the attrition will wipe out the army in a handful of turns or make it entirely useless. Now, if it does fight battles, you will keep this level of bloodletting, which, be aware, because it's an army, you do have to deal with the bloodletting mechanic. So if you don't fight battles with it, you'll take the growth penalty. If you do, you'll go up a little bit. However, you will not, none of the units will replenish. And there are different techs that will affect this type of summon otherwise, in other ways. But it's very useful because when you summon it, obviously it can't move the first turn, but the second turn, you can send it off to fight. So on turn 3, if we want, we could send Skarbrand north towards the floating village here, and we could take the Slaughter Hunters and send them west to Gorgazon and take that. Now, be aware that you cannot add units to this. I don't even think you can get Regiments of Renown. You might be able to, but Blood Hosts don't last long. You maybe get 1, maybe 2 battles out of them. The biggest use for them is to use them as supporting armies, even though they need to win battles or they have attrition. Remember how I said that sometimes you'll want to take 2 minor settlements and then go for the capital settlement in a region? This is how you would use them. You would raise 1 settlement for skulls. You'd raise a Blood Host with the other. You'd probably send Skarbrand to siege the capital settlement, move the Blood Host nearby so it reinforces, and all of a sudden, you've got a very strong army that will allow you to take most capital settlements, even with garrisons. It's kind of like a mini WoG ability if you think all the way, long way back to Total Warhammer 1 and even Total Warhammer 2 for a while, where when the Greenskins WoG'd, they got an army to follow them around. This is kind of a spiritual successor to that. Be aware, this is a pretty good army. You got Bloodletters, you got Skull Cannons, Blood Shrines. You cannot move these armies out. You can raise them. I don't even think you can combine them. But you can't really act with the army. It's just there to charge into the enemy ranks, do damage before dying. Now, be aware, if you do charge in the enemy ranks and it does die, you still get skulls from losing battles. So it's not a total loss. Plus, you get rid of this rather expensive upkeep cost. It's like half as much of our Skarbrand army. And you'll see here, because we won a battle with Skarbrand, the bloodletting has gone up. We have to win 1 more battle victory level to get it to the next one. And we have 2 turns in which to fight the battle, which can be difficult because if we were to march there, it would take us 2 turns to get there. Another thing to point out is you can go into the encampment stamp pretty much whenever you want as these guys. Be aware that it does cost you winds of magic. Not that that's a huge thing. Enables replenishment, which you already had, but more importantly, you can access the global recruitment. The global recruitment is very expensive. It's twice the normal cost, but you get it in 1 turn, so it allows you to sustain rampages abroad without having to retreat to your lands to heal and replenish new troops. The way this faction plays, you've already kind of got an idea about it. It kind of tears through the area, raising settlements, occupying a couple of them. is kind of the whole playstyle. It would not be uncommon for you to send Skarbrand north and just have him keep rampaging north until his army is defeated. The win condition for this faction, and I don't usually talk about win conditions, but it's worth pointing out. To win a short campaign victory, you have to complete a quest battle, which is not particularly hard to do because you unlock it once Skarbrand hits level 10. But then you have to loot, occupy, raise, or sack 35 different settlements. This is where just sending Skarbrand off to get experience and eventually lose a battle and then recruit him at your capital isn't a bad strategy, seeing that your win condition is arguably one of the easiest win conditions in the game. It's not that hard to take over 35 settlements as this faction. You'll pick up, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 within like the first 20 turns. You can win this campaign super fast, especially with the additional movement range you get and the combat. It's great. I will point out Blood Reapers here are an invaluable unit for your campaign, mainly because they get an increased mobility range. They're also strong units, but the increased mobility is great because you have to keep this bloodletting high on the army to actually keep growing and getting stronger. You really need to chain battles. The increased movement range helps you get from battles faster. And that's kind of it for how they actually play. Periodically, you'll get ascendancies in the great games, and these different manifestations will go up. Let's just quickly show you this one. So we set this up. This battle is launched against us. I don't think we can save that unit. If we could, it'd be great. Nope. So we fight the battle. We get it. We can do a heal. Now, because we fought a battle, it increases the bloodletting a little bit higher, which is great. Now we have a little bit longer till we actually have to fight another battle. So that's really how you're going to use that manifestation, is either to get a small amount of skulls or to keep upping your bloodletting so that it doesn't decay. It does have a 15 turn cooldown, so just be aware it is expensive to do. But if you remember, we only had like 4,000. Now we've got enough to recruit 3 full units. It can be extraordinarily powerful in that sense. Okay, let's talk units. So Khorne factions, the Khornite faction, because there's only one. I suspect they'll add others. Khorne abhors magic. You will not see any real magic users among the Khornite units. You'll see a couple that have passive effects, but the Khorne factions, Khorne is very careful to point out, is not magic. That's a whole thing from the whole Chaos God that applies to the whole faction, and it's fine. I mentioned every one of your units has spell resistance. They do. It's usually like 15 or so, which reduces damage of spells. You can obviously boost it higher through bloodletting and techs. It means that despite not having magic and not really having range, this faction is not a pushover when it comes to fighting magic users. Even the strongest magic user in the game is not going to be able to wipe out a Khorne army on its own, unlike other factions, just because of the spell resistance alone. Now, Khorne is pretty much a purely melee faction. Hilariously, they are less melee focused than someone like Nikari, the Seducers of Slaanesh, which is kind of amusing to me. So the first base unit for Khorne is a Bloodletter of Khorne. It's a great sword infantry. It's armor piercings, anti-infantry. It is a great infantry. It counts as a tier 2 infantry unit, and you get it in your base settlements. And from your base over here, your level 2 here. It's a great unit. You're going to use a lot of Bloodletters in your armies. They do their job. They kill some stuff half decently. Against level 1 or even level 2 infantry, they will tear them to shreds. Higher level infantry will destroy them, though. They have virtually no defense. It's all about magic attacks. They do it's all about melee attacks. They do magical attacks, and they have bonuses versus infantry. They're also, be aware, a demonic unit, so they won't rout. They will literally just die in place if they lose a battle. And they have good physical resistance, which means this low melee defense stat isn't actually as bad as it seems. So the next one, and I will just go a little bit out of order here. If you upgrade this faction here, this Servant's Tree, you will get Exalted Bloodletters of Khorne. These are just a flat upgrade to the Bloodletters of Khorne. When you get them, you're going to want to switch to them. They're way more expensive to maintain, though. But if we look at the stats, 34 to 42, 26 melee defense to 34, weapon strength 34 to 44, charge bonus 30 to 36. They're basically better in every single way. They also come with a different ability, which I will point out, and this is a reoccurring ability among a lot of Khorne units, which is Hellblade. As you kill units, if you get more than 80 kills, they get a huge boost to weapons damage and armor piercing damage. So basically, if you're winning a battle, this allows you to win the battle harder and faster. Also, because they're a demonic unit, both levels of it cause fear. So let's keep going with this tree. We have one other thing to note here, which is Chaos Furies, the Khornite version of the Chaos Gods flying unit. It's not great. Khorne ones I think are a little bit better because they tend to have higher melee attack. Plus they have Frenzy here, which makes them hit harder. You can bring these if you're fighting a siege battle. They're half decent, or they're more than half decent at destroying any towers that have been built because they can attack them very quickly. And being a flying unit, they can actually destroy towers in melee combat. Don't expect them to win any battles for you. They're not a great unit, let's be honest. But they have their place. They're relatively cheap to maintain. They can do some great flanks on archers and artillery from above. The problem is Khorne has better units for basically all of those roles. The next one is because your capital has an option between two, you can also unlock and have access to the Chaos Warriors of Khorne. So the Chaos Warriors of Khorne are lesser in melee attack, higher in melee defense. They have better armor. And then they have a shield as well. These are solid tier 2 infantry units you get from the base settlement. They will hold their own in melee combat. In some ways, in many ways, they are better than Bloodletters, especially for defending settlements. These things are hard to kill. They don't tend to get tons and tons of kills. They're not armor piercing despite having axes, but they're a great unit. You'll never really feel disappointed using them. The only downside is they are slow. So don't expect them to keep up with the rest of your army and join battles on the front line. They are very well deployed as the center of your army if the enemy charges you, or defending settlements where they can stand in one place and kill things. The other option is you can, rather than having them with the shield and axe, you can have them be dual weapons, berserker axe infantry. These guys hit harder. They move significantly faster. They can keep up with Bloodletters almost. They're a good unit for being a Marauder unit, which is kind of surprising. Most Marauder units aren't that great. These guys are something of an exception. They are not armor piercing, be aware though, so they will not do well against factions who have armored units. But against a unit like Skaven, they will slaughter Skaven units relatively quickly. They're also particularly good against the Tomb Kings, which you'll be fighting. Then the next one is we've got the creature ones. You have access to Chaos Warhounds. This is the Khorne version. Hits hard, moves fast. If you don't have access to Cav yet, this is a good alternative for routing and harassing units. They're decent in melee combat. If you get a flank off, they can do some damage. They don't have a great charge bonus, though. They don't do really any damage to armor. But they have decent missile resistance as well. They, interestingly enough, don't seem to get magic resistance. I don't know if that is an intentional thing at the moment, or if it was just left off, because all the other units basically have spell resistance. The next ones are the Flesh Hounds of Khorne, which are a pretty much flat upgrade from the Chaos Warhounds. It's a huge boost. Once you get these, you're never going to want to use Chaos Warhounds. These guys are much more effective. They have physical resistance and magic resistance, making them a lot harder to kill. They hit harder. They move about as fast. They have much better weapon strength and charge bonus. If you have pre-good cav, these are a great unit to have one or two of them in your army. And you deploy them. They hit hard. They can rout archers. They can even hold up to some base cav units. And when you need to, you can always run them into the back of the enemy line where they will prove their effectiveness. The other one you get from this, and it's odd they're under creatures, are the Forsaken, which I guess are entirely mutated human units, so it makes sense they're creatures, but I would have put them on the barracks tree. Who knows why they're here? They hit hard. They're a great unit. They're a damage dealer. They have flaming attacks, which is really cool because they reduce healing on units. So if you're fighting vampires or anyone else who has healing spells, this will help you with that. The Exalted Bloodthirsters, Exalted Bloodletters also have the same thing. I didn't mention that. They're a great unit. I tend to find they die faster than I would like in combat. But they're pretty solid. They are not a demonic unit though, so they can rout. Same with the Forsaken can run away. The Chaos Warhounds can, but the Fleshhounds cannot. So just be aware some of your units have leadership problems. Other ones will literally fight to the death. So keeping track of that in an army can sometimes be confusing, and you'll look at your army and says, why are these guys running away, but these guys aren't? You just happen to have units that aren't demonic. And then finally, at the top of the creature line is the Spawn of Khorne. So this is a standard spawn unit, hits a little bit harder, moves a little bit faster, has better magic resistance. Interestingly enough, it does not get a melee physical resistance, unlike some of the other Khorne units. I guess it would make it far too strong. You have 16 of them. They're a great unit. You charge them into battle. They will literally fight until they die. They're a good damage dealer. They're really powerful against mid to low-level infantry trash. They will tear through them, which is great. The only problem is they're not overwhelmingly fast, so don't try and use them to chase down Cav, for example. But considering your whole army is going to charge at the enemy, these guys will probably hit the enemy line, and they will pay for themselves. The next one is your Mortal Servants Forge line. If you didn't already have access to the Marauders from over here, this gives you access to some of them. Now, interestingly enough, to get Chaos Warriors, you can get as a base 1 provincial capital. To get them over here requires a level 2 barracks. Instead, you have a Marauder of Khorne without a shield. I would avoid this unit. You have better options. You have better options overall. These guys are much more useful in an actual combat situation. But it's up to you. You could build these. You're usually, by the time you build this building, you've probably already got settlement to level 2 anyway. So you'll have access to the Chaos Warriors, which are significantly better. Then you also get access to the Throwing Horsemen. This is right out of Norska. This is a terrible unit for Khorne. I wouldn't really necessarily bring it. If you want some missile strength, bring it, but it's going to die to basically any other range unit. If you feel the need to skirmish as Khorne, you're playing the faction wrong, in my opinion. It's all about charging in. This could, of course, be used to draw off an enemy cav unit, like from Bretonia or something, a strong unit, and tie it up for a while. At that point, it might be worth it, but otherwise, don't build it. This is where you get access to the Cultists of Khorne. It's probably worth having one of those in the armies and building up the replenished troop. They're also half decent at fighting, so if you throw them into combat, they're really powerful. They tend not to die. They have the ability to summon Bloodletters and boost their own combat ability. They're a pretty solid unit. They get stronger. They can become as strong as most other factions' legendary lords. All the Khornite hero units are really good at combat. And then the final part of this tree, you have access to the Chaos Warriors of Khorne with Halabards and with dual weapons. I tend to take the one with a Halabard just because it's good when you're fighting Cav, and it is armor piercing, unlike the Chaos Warriors with dual weapons, meaning anything you fight with armor, dwarves, for example, cough cough, they will do much better against. They're solid, strong, tier 2 only infantry though. They're moderately expensive to maintain, and you do get them relatively late in the game, but they do their job. They're hard to kill, well armored, a great defensive unit. Then we will get into the mounted servants. interestingly enough, Khorne has a lot of cav units, and even more if you consider the speed mobility of the Chaos Warhounds. The first one you have is the Chaos Knights of Khorne. It is a very solid cav unit. They hit hard, they're armored, they hold out for a while in melee combat. They have flaming attacks, good against vampires, tomb kings, and some of the elves, and the lizardmen. And they're a good unit. The only thing is they are expensive to maintain, and we'll talk a little bit more about the economy later. Suffice to say, they're pretty good. Then you have access to the Exalted Heroes. The Exalted Heroes are kind of interesting. They provide training, which is less of a need for Khorne than other factions, but they are a solid melee fighter. They have the ability to gain physical resistance and melee attack as they kill and fight in melee, more fighting. This means given a while, they can become a lot stronger as they fight, and they can also start with Deadly Onslaught, and overall are a very solid fighting unit. It might be worth bringing one or two of them. I don't really bring these that much, mainly because their effect is not game breaking like replenishment is, and for their cost, I can bring a regiment of bloodletters who tend to kill more things in the long run. But it's up to you. They're pretty useful. It's also worth noting that building up this line of tree gives you recruit rank on your units, so it's usually worth building pretty much everywhere you are going to ever recruit units. Next level, you have access to the Chaos Knights with lances. This is just a pretty well straight buff from the Chaos Knights of Khorne. They hit hard. They have a much greater charge bonus. It's almost doubled. They are a great shot cav unit. You hit enemies with these, unless they're a great unit, any archers are going to rout, any artillery is going to rout, and even most level low infantry is going to have trouble killing these things. Again, flaming attacks, anti-healing is always nice. Then you have access to the Blood Crushers of Khorne. This is a slightly smaller unit than the Chaos Knights of Khorne, but it is lower maintenance. It's still considered a tier 3 unit. They hit pretty hard. I prefer the Chaos Knights of Khorne myself, but try these out. Figure out how you feel about them. They do magic attacks compared to flaming attacks, and if they get a lot of kills, they get stronger. Whereas the Chaos Knights do not have that ability. And then finally, up at the top, you have Skull Crushers of Khorne, which is kind of an upgrade from Blood Crushers. They're basically better in every way. This is a very powerful shot cav unit. They hit hard. They're great against other monstrous units or other cav. They have fear. They have frenzy. The only thing they don't have is the ability to get stronger from killing things. But overall, a great solid unit. Rather expensive to maintain, though. So let's just keep going. This is your Greater Servants tree. This gives you access to Blood Reapers, which I have already kind of spoken about already. They have the increased mobility, so this is worth having, and they're a decent melee unit as well. Now, outside of that, you have access to Minotaurs of Khorne. They're a great monstrous unit. They kill things fairly well. They're anti-infantry. Honestly, at some point, you're spoiled for choices about Khorne, so you kind of have to figure out which ones you feel better using. These guys are quite strong. They hit hard. They're a great unit for killing things that are slightly more... Well, they're great at killing stuff like dwarves. With armor and solid infantry, they will wipe them out. They're also a siege attacker, but then again, a lot of Khorne units have siege attack abilities, so it's not game-breaking in that sense. Then you have the Chosen of Khorne, and this is getting into really high-level infantry. Great melee defense, solid melee attack with frenzy, good armor. They will block 55%, which is up compared to some of the others. These units, you throw them into combat, they're going to kill most infantry, or at least go even with them. And with the spell resistance, the enemy is going to literally have to either shoot you or hack you apart, because killing you with spells is rather difficult. And then at the end, the final one for battlefields, you get access to the Chosen of Khorne, which is an upgrade from this. However, it does sacrifice the shield for additional weapon damage and stuff. I tend to stay with the lower one, actually, just because of the shield. and the increased armor. Well, actually, the shield is increased block chance rather than actual armor. All told, it kind of works out that I find these units to work better. Less melee weapon strength and charge bonus, but they're not fast anyway, so you're probably not going to be charging into too many enemies effectively with these guys. They're more hold the line units. Then you have access to the Minotaurs of Khorne with the great weapons. It's pretty much a good flat upgrade. Overall, you're probably going to want to use the Minotaurs of Khorne when you get them. The combat stats are about the same. The only difference is an increased charge bonus and an increased 25 upkeep. Overall, they're almost the same units. The only difference is these guys with great weapons are anti-large, whereas the Minotaurs are anti-infantry, so better against monsters, large units, cav, etc. You could probably get away with just staying with the Minotaurs and then using something like Skull Crushers to take the place of the Minotaurs. And then finally, you get oddly enough, another flying unit after the Chaos Harpies. This is a flying monster. It's kind of their equivalent of like a dragon unit. It's not a dragon unit, but if you play the other factions with dragons, this is kind of that type of unit. Strong, hard-hitting, flying unit. Pretty hard to kill. Causes terror. Good spell, good physical resistance. Siege attacker, hits reasonably hard. Does not have a ranged weapon like a dragon does, but you bring a couple of these, drop them in the enemy lines. If you can afford a couple of them, if not, one will do its job and hit hard and kill things. And then over here, we have what's a very odd thing for Khorne, which is a range unit. You have the Skull Cannon. You actually get an artillery unit. This is why, surprisingly, they're less melee focused than the Slaanesh faction. Skull Cannon is also pretty decent in melee combat. I will point that out. And if you fight in melee combat, you will replenish your ammunition because you will get skulls. They fire from a long distance. They will also heal in melee combat. Just be aware, this is not going to hold up to a cav charge. The unit will eventually die. It will just hold out better than most artillery in melee combat because it heals and stuff. Don't use it as a melee unit unless you have to. It does move, surprisingly for an artillery unit, rather fast, which can allow for some very interesting flanks. And if you can find a trash unit like a Skaven Slave, charge into those in melee combat, get your ammunition back, and start shooting. It is a great range. It does good damage. Overall, you're probably going to want to bring one of these to every top level army that you ever build. The problem, of course, for this faction is upkeep. Next to that, you have the Blood Shrine. This is another unit you're going to want to bring one to. This is very similar to the Lizardmen revitalization crystal type units with an aura that boosts things. This, on the other hand, does not heal. It heals itself. It's in combat, but what it does is it provides more melee attack and leadership, meaning your demonic units will hit significantly harder. Since they have 38, this is like a 1/5 buff. The additional leadership makes sure they rout less. And overall, it's a solid unit to bring. It's a support unit more than some of the others, but it's worth having on the battlefield. Next to that, you have the Chaos Chariots, which is a solid chariot unit that can run around the map and do damage. The problem is I find it's overshadowed by the Chaos Knights. It is cheaper to build and maintain, though, so you might have a place for them. Honestly, though, I tend to go from the Bloodhounds of Khorne over here straight to Cav and pretty much ignore the Chaos Chariots. The next level of that, we have the Chaos War Shrines, another support one. This is a different support than the Blood Shrine. So the Blood Shrine gives a flat melee attack and leadership. The Chaos War Shrine gains that ability, weapon strength, armor piercing, and the melee attack. It does not gain leadership. At most, it can match the melee attack of the lower one. The big benefit it brings is the weapon and armor piercing, and it builds this up with every nearby entity death. It does not have to kill the enemy. It just has to be in the area. Now, what about the leadership? It just has a passive larger leadership buff. So overall, it is an upgrade. It just has less melee attack at the beginning, but it is stronger the longer the battle goes on for. So just be aware that despite the similarities in the unit, there is a difference in how you use them. and when their effects apply. One applies at the beginning of the battle, the other applies mid to late. And overall, it's half decent at melee combat. I honestly, I could hardly tell you a Khorne unit that's bad at melee combat outside of maybe the Chaos Warhounds and the Harpies. The Furies, rather. And then the next level we get to, the next one we have is a Gore Beast Chariot. Now, this one is a significant improvement on the Chaos Chariot. It's a tier 3 unit, which means it should be decently strong. I find it's still kind of outmatched by Cav units. That's just my opinion. They move faster, they hit harder. It is a chariot, though, so it does have really good charge bonus and knocks enemies back when it hits them. So, kind of use that as you will. The actual, I can get to it. The actual mass of the entity is significantly higher, which allows for greater collisions and knockbacks. So it will stun and knock back more enemies when it charges into them, which can have its bonus. It just won't kill things as much, but it's a great disruptive unit. Has no particular special abilities associated with it. And then the Finder is the Soul Grinder for Khorne. It's a great unit. Soul Grinders are, by and large, some of the strongest of the demonic faction units. It's much more melee combat focused than the others. It's better than, say, the Slaneshi one. And I think the Teach one, the Nurgle one, is particularly strong. These guys, they hit hard. They are a ranged unit, which is quite interesting. It's short. They have a solid unit. Just be aware that if Fire of Will is disabled, they will only shoot if they've been ordered to charge. If they are, they will shoot. This can trip you up, and it did the first time, which is why I'm mentioning it. Fire at Will is usually worth having on, but then they won't go into melee combat where they're strong until they've used their ammunition. So think of it as you will. It's a nice range unit. It hits reasonably hard, but its strength is actually melee combat, where it is fairly good at what it does. And that is it for the Khorne units. Overall, hard-hitting, reasonably fast-moving, armor-piercing enemy army. Basically, this is the melee faction. There's almost no other faction in the game that matches them in melee combat to the level they have. So why is this not the strongest faction in the game? Well, we will talk about that when I talk about economy next. Okay, economy. So the economy for Khorne is pathetic in the sense that your buildings, as we were going over these earlier with the units, you might notice that every single building you build gives you income. This is very similar to how the Skaven are. The higher the level building, the more income. However, maxed out, this is a 100 generation. To build the unit there is 400. You'd have to have 4 of these buildings to be able to, or 5, to actually be able to support a single unit. Now, there are ways to get around that to some degree. The Khorne's economy buildings, they don't have any, per se, pure economy building. The closest they get is this one, which gives more income from post-battle loot in adjacent regions. Basically, if you fight a battle nearby, you make more money from winning the battle. Obviously, you don't make any from losing. Since you're supposed to be fighting, this can be a good source of your economy. The problem is you'll probably expand away from the nearby regions pretty quickly as Skarbrand, so this loses its benefit. On the other hand, on defense, this can give you a large chunk of money to rebuild an army that you might need if you've lost an army recently. So let's quickly go through the others. So this is a capital settlement only building, if I remember correctly. It causes attrition for enemies in the region, which is really nice because it does provide some additional defense for Khorne, which you desperately need. And if an enemy is in the province, and they're taking attrition, obviously, this will give you income. This is kind of a... Khorne is an offensive faction, but has surprisingly decent defense, and this is part of the reason why. It also increases your hero and other recruitment ranks. In every capital settlement, this is a building you will want to build at some point so that you don't lose the capital settlement. You also have a garrison building. Now, this garrison building, maxed out. I only get 6 units. Khorne units are amazingly good at fighting, so getting 6 units upkeep free in a garrison is great. Plus, it gives you increased tower projectiles. You put one of these in a capital settlement here, it is extraordinarily hard to take, especially if you're suffering attrition to do so. Other factions like Kislev have to do an edict, and the Lizardmen have to do a ritual to get attrition. You can just build a building that increases on top of the chaos attrition stuff. It's quite cool. They have a guarded warp stone. I never felt the need to build this in my campaign as Skarbrand. Just the reduced plague, yeah, if you're fighting a plague monster or you're worried about Skaven undercities, but you can use heroes to find the undercities. And honestly, if you leave any faction alive next to you that's casting plagues on you, what are you doing as Khorne? You should be killing them anyway. Outside of that, you have a control building. This will be semi-necessary for you to build eventually. You gain control whenever a battle is fought nearby. If an enemy lords in your lands, control goes up. This means any raiding beastman factions that happen to wander through your lands and are at war with you, their raiding and causing damage won't cause rebellions in your lands, which is quite nice. Basically, your faction focuses on fighting the enemy. Between these two here, attrition and public order, means if the enemy's invading your lands, you won't have revolts. They'll be taking attrition, and if you stick a garrison there, they're going to be strong. So having people in your lands as Khorne is actually not really a problem because you make more money, they take attrition, your lands are more loyal. It's a really strange combination of how it works. I don't feel it works together perfectly. I feel a little bit of a tweak rework is needed just to integrate it better, but it's still a rather cool mechanic. And then finally, as I already mentioned, you have income from post-battle loot. It's also you get casualty replenishment if you're on the defensive and fighting in your lands, or you need to make money from fighting battles. This is a good one to have in your settlements as well. Just be aware, you have a lot of recruitment buildings. You have 6 buildings to build in a settlement for fighting, leaving you 1, assuming you want to build all of them, for an economy or a garrison, which means you have to pick and choose which tree you want. If I had to pick a tree to neglect, or 2 trees to neglect of military recruitment for Khorne, I would probably neglect the creature tree, and I might even neglect the basic mortal servants tree, focusing more in bloodletters, heavy cav, and monstrous units. It's personal preference though, because these chaos warriors are great. And then the last of them is a trophy rack. So this one is quite interesting because it boosts the income from all buildings, meaning you're going to want to put this in pretty much even your most minor settlements, because all told, plus 50 income is great. However, obviously your income is relatively bad, but this makes it much more manageable. A fully built up settlement with plenty of buildings, one of these, garrisons, etc., you'll actually make enough money to support an army out of it. Or at least a good chunk of an army, if not a full army, because of how expensive Khorne units are. I mean, this is a 500 upkeep. This at most gives you 90 alone, which means you need to combo it with other stuff. So for Khorne, the vast majority of your income comes from fighting, looting, raiding, sacking. Unfortunately, you don't get money from raising like other factions because you instead get skulls or other stuff. But if you look at Skarbrand's tree here, he gets ways to boost his income from raiding and sacking as well as cheaper upkeep and other stuff, which means it's a bit more manageable to do. Plus, remember that your lords do gain traits as you fight. So if you raid a lot, you destroy a lot of settlements, or you sack a lot, you'll get traits that make those more efficient to do. It's definitely something you want to focus on, as Khorne is a lot of sacking if you're desperate need of income, but otherwise you're going to get a lot of money from fighting the battles, which you want to fight anyway from bloodletting. And as you fight more with bloodletting, the upkeep for your army goes down. So Khorne, in the end, is a feast or famine faction. You're either doing really well or you're not doing well at all and have to rebuild. There's almost no middle ground where you're doing okay. You go in cycles. You build up, you rampage out, you eventually get you lose, you get pushed back, you can't fight, you kill all the enemies, you decline until you rebuild or another faction recolonizes the land, and then you go in again. Just be aware, you have to get 35 different ones. Doesn't count if you loot or sack the same settlement, meaning as Skarbrand, you have to roam far abroad. You get a lot if you go south, but then you'll be messing with siege factions and vampires, who, by the way, vampires and Tomb Kings are like, the chef kiss for this type of faction because they're melee factions and you're stronger in melee combat. It's great. Okay, let's talk technology. So Khorne's technology is all locked behind having skulls and behind researching in categories. So at the beginning, one category will be open. Every technology in here costs 300 skulls, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, and then 1,000. Obviously, the further you go down the tree, the more skulls you need, the better the technology is. Now, be aware you'll get more skulls as the game goes on because you'll be sacking, fighting better, bigger, more armies. So don't worry about that too much. Just be aware that if you are going to keep using this skull throne, it is going to deplete the amount of skulls you have to spend on technology, and you can get into a very vicious cycle of never having skulls to research. You should always make sure you have skulls to research. It is not worth sitting around to use Skull Throne if you can't research. Researching is, of course, a very powerful thing, and even more on Khorne. So let's get into it. The first tech you probably want to do is Skulls for the Skull Throne. This will give you a flat 50 skulls per turn. Without this, you have virtually no skull income, except from battles. This will help quite a lot if you don't have an army. For example, it's died, and you still want to research tech. This is a little bit boost, but 6 turns, or whatever, you'll have a half decent amount of skulls so that you can at least research some technologies, even if not the higher ones. And this reappears periodically through the tech tree. So like skulls to bring, and the third you get more skulls. I think it repeats. Well, it doesn't repeat, but it is again down here as well. More skulls gain as you keep going down it. You will get more and more abilities to get skulls. But anyway, so this is probably the first one you'll want to research, in my opinion. There are some other good ones in this first tree, and you have to research 3 to unlock the second tree. Doesn't mean the first tree technologies are bad, and at some point you will want to research all of them. It just means that you'll have the next tech group open, which has some better tech. So Skulls for Skull's Throne. Rage Within is interesting. If you're going to use Cav, this is a great one to get because it reduces upkeep. And as I talked about, Khorne suffers in the economy department. This one, if you're going to use Bloodletters, the 8 spell resistance is great. This pushes them up to, I think, 23 or more, assuming you're not having bloodletting on them. This means they're going to take significantly less damage from magic. If you're fighting magic users, this is invaluable because they hurt. Spread Rage is great. This has Khorne Corruption. And it has a 5% chance to automatically colonize ruined regions in the province. And this is something I just realized I totally forgot to talk about. And it is a bit of a mechanic, so I should have talked about it at the beginning of the video. So I'll talk about it here. Every single one of your settlements here, settlement buildings, has a midway down chance to automatically colonize ruined regions within your province. So within this ruin here has a 5% chance to be colonized automatically for free. No skull cost for you every turn. Of course, enemies tend to rush in and take it, but this supports Khorne's whole thing about, and Skarbrand's whole thing about totally razing an entire area to the ground and maybe owning one province in it. So like if you raised up here, you raise all this, you keep Morgheim. Eventually these will be recolonized for you as minor settlements where you'll be able to build some income buildings and stuff. It's a great mechanic, and the fact that this Spread Rage will increase it to 10% means that you'll get those colonies a lot faster before other people rush in to take them. Outside of this, serial killing can be nice, especially if you're going to use a lot of blood hosts. The increased movement is always a good thing. Allows them to fight and die faster and more. Skull harvesting. This is a very powerful tech that you're going to want to get for the increased battle loot, along with bitter raiding, increased income from raiding. These two are almost a necessity to build on Skarbrand. So I would probably do Skulls for Skull Throne. Then I'd probably do Skull Harvesting right now. And then I would snag bitter raiding as third or even fourth, just because at some point you're going to want to raid to get income, and you're not going to need to raid to get income in the first like 8 turns, but after that you're going to want to. And then Blood Feasting here is worth grabbing as well, especially if you're going to use Blood Host along with Serial Killing. Cheaper upkeep, which is great, and it gives a banner that you can put on a unit that has healing per second. If you put it onto one of your heroes or a really strong unit, they suddenly become massively harder to kill. Massively harder to kill. And you can put it on Skarbrand and stuff, as far as I'm aware. Then, in the second tech, you have access to a variety of things. If you're for some reason fighting Slanesh's faction, which as Skarbrand in this Immortal Empires, you won't be. Hounds of War, if you're going to use Flesh Hounds, bonus first large, they're better against Cav and monsters. It's not a technology I'd recommend. Hungry Spawn, if you're going to use Spawn or Forsaken, increased penetrate, armor piercing, and speed is nice. Failure in battle is great if you're using Blood Hosts, reduces the casualties from Bloodthirst attrition. Considering you're going to want to use Blood Hosts periodically, this just makes them more efficient in the long run, able to do and take more casualties. War Leaders, this is not a tech you need to rush as Skarbrand. Your economy is pretty bad, so the odds of you recruiting lots of lords early on are probably low, unless you've done an immense rampage and you got a huge war chest where you can raise. You'd have to have like 30 or 40,000 gold to really raise a full army as Khorne and then use it before running out of cash. At which point, War Leaders would be useful. I would ignore it for now. Sounds of War, this is a good one. Decreases Skull of Thrones cost by 10%. That'll save you like 200 skulls each time, and allows you to summon additional Bloodthirster in battle. This is great. This Summon Bloodthirster army ability, it adds another unit to your army, and considering in Khorne has semi-economy problems, you probably are not going to be having full army stacks for a while. This solves that problem to some degree. War Tributes, income from all buildings is really good. Sadly, it's low and your income is low, but 10% is nothing to scoff at. And Spoils of Battle, increase income from sacking. So in my opinion, the ones you should really focus on in this one are Sounds of War, War Tributes, and Spoil of Battles. Those are the priorities here, increasing your income and making your army stronger. Next one, this is a great one. Relentless Rage, entity cannot die while ability is active. They can still take damage, but if you use this on a Bloodthirster, they will not die, which means they can hold out for significantly longer despite losing battles. Admiring the Corrupt is always good. Additional unit in your Blood Host. Skull Reaper here. Unit Blood Hosts that move faster, attack harder. Killer's Trophy, decreased upkeep for Blood Hosts. This seems to be the Blood Host tree a little bit. Harvester's Pride, if you find a skull pile on the map, increase skulls from them. I never felt the need to rely on skull piles to get skulls, but this would make it even better. Better Breeding. This is if you're going to use Chariots. I don't tend to use them, so I don't use this that much. Pride to Continue. This is very good on Blood Hosts, stacks very well with these 3 additional turn of immunity, meaning in your first time you summon the Blood Host, you have more turns to get it into combat before you start losing units. Skulls to Bring, Skulls per Throne, decreased Skull Throne cost is all very good. I would start with Skulls to Bring if you are having any trouble with skull management or paying for the Skull Throne. Then probably depends on if you're going to use your actual armies or you're going to use Blood Hosts. Considering this is all about Blood Hosts, you kind of want to use them. I would say Admiring the Corrupt and probably Pride to Continue first. If you're having economy problems, instead of Pride to Continue, I'd snag Killer's Trophy. And then Skull Reaper if you can't research anything else later on. Pillar of Prowess, Skull Cleansing, Skulls from Kills, always good. This one gives fire resistant to Blood Crushers. I don't think this is very useful, but it's up to you. Denying the warp is great, and it's probably the first or second technology you'll want to snag, especially if you're using bloodletters. And why wouldn't you? They're really good units. Increased casualty replenishment 8 is amazing. Unrelenting conflict, more summoning of bloodletters in battles. Cheaper skull throne cost, always good. You can use flesh hounds. This is a way to go. At this point, you should be past flesh hounds, so I would ignore it. Gift of martial skill makes one unit fight and attack better. You can stick this on either a hero or a high level unit, and they become even more monstrous, plus cheaper blood hosts. Snorting blood, if you're going to use minotaurs, this is worth using. This gives them the ability to increase their already strong gore greed, their blood greed with gore greed, meaning they get stronger the more things they kill, basically. They get stronger and it heals them. This makes your Minotaur units really strong, and at this point, you should start using them. It's worth using. Demonic Melding, range for Skull Cannon. Skull Cannon already has a good range. This just makes them even further. It's not a huge priority. So, denying the warp for Bloodletters, Skull Flensing, probably Unrelenting Conflict, and then Snorting Blood if you can use Minotaurs and Martial Skill. Ignore Dog Fighting and Demonic Melding, probably. Pillar of Wrath, Skulls of the Enemy is great, especially because tech is getting more expensive. Increasing skulls gained from kills for all armies, whether you win or lose the battles, is great. Gates of Wrath, you'll get an additional Bloodthirster unit when you create a Blood Host. Solid if you're using Blood Host. Hateful to Die, probably the first tech you want to get here. General Casualty Replenishment allows you to fight more, be less dependent on bloodletting to heal your units. Way of Wrath, if you're going to do a total war and fight everybody, this is great. You're probably going to be fighting everybody pretty much anyway, so this is just a flat 15 weapon increase. Wrathful Slaughter it's not magic. They're very clear it's not magic. It's an army ability, though, that's kind of magic. It's a huge, high damaging explosion. Basically, Khorne drops a giant sword from the sky onto the ground and hits everything in an area. It's very powerful when you get it. It's worth snagging as a tech. It allowed you to kill lots of trash units or damage strong ones. This one, Send Them Wrath. This one makes getting Exalted Blood letters cheaper. Sorry, not cheaper, faster, because they have a 2-turn recruitment time. This puts it down to 1. Juggernaut Anger, if you're using Skull Crushers of Khorne, it's good. If you're not, don't buy it. This is one that can usually wait for later. And Renegotiate Bargains. If you're using Soul Grinders, this is a solid one as well. Although the armor-piercing missile damage is honestly kind of pathetic, considering the Skull Grinders already hit super hard. So, Too Hateful to Die, Way of Wrath, Skulls of the Enemy, Gate of Wrath if you're using Blood Hosts, and then Wrathful Slaughter. So, all told, Too Hateful to Die, Wrathful Slaughter, Skulls of the Enemy will be the 3 to get you further. Then pick what other ones you want. Pillar of Defiance, deny the missiles, reduce melee resistance. If you're fighting elves or anyone in range, you need this. This is a great one to snag. Glorious Deaths gives you an additional turn of Blood Host immunity from battles, not from start. Meaning if you fight a battle, you have longer to get your Blood Host around before they start taking attrition. It's good if you're using lots of Blood Hosts. This one, Bloodthirsters now have a 8% ward save, which is really good. Be aware that this is not the same thing as your Bloodletters. It's a different unit, so don't think it's that super amazing. But if you're using Bloodthirsters, ward save is always good. This one makes a unit hit super hard. You stick this on a Lord or high-level infantry, they will annihilate things. It's particularly good on the high-level Khorne Cav because of that charge bonus boost. Gift of Defiance, again, more summoning of Bloodletters, more units on creation. Campaign movement after raising a settlement is really nice in general, and then an 8% upkeep. All told, Exist Always is probably the first one you want to get just to help your economy. Abjuration Reaper is really, really good for stacking bloodletting, so it's probably should be your second one. And outside of that, I might do Gift of Defiance or Defiant Muster. Later on, deny their missiles, or if you're fighting like an Elven faction or something with lots of range, that's worth it. Pillar of Rivalry, If you're fighting against the Demonic Prince faction, makes them stronger. The odds of you fighting them are pretty low, so I wouldn't worry about it. This one, if you're fighting Nurgles, Nurglish factions, reduces plague. Otherwise, don't get it. Vesture of Mortals, if you're fighting other Chaos factions, get it. Otherwise, don't. Dragon Slayers, if you're fighting Cathay, get it or don't. Tsars, Kislev, these are all the other ones. The only ones you probably want to think about are the Siege faction. If you go south, spell resistance is great. The Ogre Bane, there tends to be a lot of Ogre factions running around the map. So this is a solid one, especially because as Khorne, they're melee too, mostly. So they're a great unit for you, a great faction for you to fight. So that would be worth it. Scene Killers. Honestly, I've never ran across the Nurglish factions, the Demonic Prince factions, or even the other really Chaos factions. So probably Bloodiest Rivals in case you run across another Khorne one. This is kind of pick these two and then pick whatever other one you want. And the final one, Pillar of Honor. Return for honor, increased hit points, recovery, wound of all characters. You should get your heroes up to level 20 if you can, unless they die because your army dies, in which case try to move them outside your army before your army dies. Rune recovery and hit points just makes your lords and heroes that much stronger. This one, cheaper Skull Crushers and Chaos Knights, they recruit faster. Repel the Honorless, you have great immunity to ambush. This is very good, especially fighting Skaven or other players who might want to ambush you. Staunch Defender, defensive supplies 2,000. This will allow you to build 2 towers at the start of every siege battle. Is really, really good. It's a top of any faction technology. Honor and Blood lets your bloodletters do insane amounts more damage and health. Remember I said you're going to use a lot of bloodletters. This makes them a lot stronger, and rather than tier 2, this pushes them towards tier 3. This one, if you're defending, your siege is even better. And Keeper of Ages, Blood Reapers as well. And then Favored one gets your lords and heroes better. Return for Honor if you got level 20s. Favored one if you don't. Honor and Blood should probably be your first one if you're going to be using bloodletters. And do not forget Staunch Defender, because it is amazing. And that is the technology for Khorne. Now, in terms of starting moves for Skarbrand, and you can do this differently, but I've tried this several times, and unless you do it in a certain order, you tend to get off to a less good start than you would like. So first off, you want to fight the initial battle, win it, retreat to your lands, put it in your demonic portal stance probably, or just stand there normally because you heal anyway. Raise 3 more bloodletters. Definitely make sure you've put your hero unit inside your army before the first battle because they will level up and then you can add the increased mobility on them. Skarbrand's first level up ability should be Route Marcher. Second ones should be into Blood Feasting, so your army heals faster, especially because you heal in enemy provinces. After on your second turn, march in, take a Gruul Migdal. Do not raise a Blood Host like I showed as an example earlier. You want to either raise or occupy. I would honestly get the skulls for the Skull Throne at this point. You can occupy it. It won't be a province you'll defend. To be honest, most Khorne settlements will get taken by enemies left and right. Your garrisons aren't great, even though they do some substantial damage to attacking armies. Then you want to probably march north towards Floating Village. The reason I say you want to go north to Floating Village is if you don't and you go west to take Gorgazan, I have seen the enemy raise an army here and try and take my capital. Your capital has a decent garrison. It's relatively small, 7 units, which is why once you level it up to 3, you should definitely throw a garrison building into it. If you worry about it getting taken, rather than upgrading this settlement, which you can do on turn 1 to get you Chaos Warriors and Cultists of Khorne, you can destroy this building and instead build the garrison. I would probably recommend upgrading it just so that you have access to another hero and some better melee troops. But if you're worried, definitely put the garrison there. With the garrison, that settlement is super hard to take, especially early game for the AI or even other players. March north, take Floating Village. don't raise a blood host, just raise the settlement. You won't be able to hold it. Then you're going to probably want to march west, take out as much as you can of top knots. At some point, in my experience, Wurzag, the great prophet up here of the savage orcs, will attack you. Be aware that you can move around the map in an ambush stance. If there's superior armies nearby, like they've got a full stack and you don't have a full stack, which you won't be able to support. This is the largest army you're going to have for some time, probably 13 to 15 units. Um, Moving an ambush stance can be really good because then they won't attack you. Instead, they'll charge your settlements. You can sneak behind them and take out your settlements. And be aware, losing a settlement is Khorne is not that devastating because as long as it's not a capital settlement, that chance to recolonize is really good. Um, Obviously, if they occupy it, you won't get it back, but a lot of times they will raise your settlement, especially in this area because you've got beastmen, greenskins. They tend to raise settlements more than other factions. You will get them back. Be aware, though, it does cost money to build the settlement buildings, so it is an investment. So don't lose them willy nilly, but don't focus on defending anything other than capital settlements or provincial capitals, as they say. Afterwards, you're probably going to want to sneak up, take out some of the Great Green Prophet's lands. If you can, taking his capital here is a good spot for second base. It's relatively easy to defend in terms of a location. It's protected from one side. You can very quickly get it to level 2, put a garrison there, and then that gives you 2 bases to expand from. And then if you want, you can try and unite the lands in between or just send Skarbrand off on a rampage. If he dies, try not to lose the hero in there. If need be, just move it out before you fight a battle or something that you might lose. Try and save the heroes. They're important. Getting them to level 20 is really good because they're strong units, makes them immortal. Plus, they get stuff like the Blood Throne, which is really quite cool because this gives like the Totem of Endless Blood Living buffs and other stuff. It's quite cool to have on your armies. And basically, you just want to keep expanding in different directions. Go south, go east. Death Gorge here, if you get the garrison in it, and you could even stick a lord with one army in there. Be aware that a lord with one army, though, will reduce your growth to almost nothing, meaning your other army out there fighting needs to stay at a decent level of bloodletting so that your province will actually grow up. Basically, make Death Gorge or a northern province or whatever capital settlement you pick your recruitment center. It unlocks all the units. Then you basically go out, die, rinse, repeat, build up a new army, charge out and die, and just get to the 35. The quest battle is not overwhelmingly hard in my experience. It is harder than it would appear at first. Oh, I haven't unlocked it yet in this this version because it's only turn 3. It looks like it only has 5 enemies in the army you're gonna fight. Don't be fooled. There are reinforcements. It's not as easy as it looks, but it's a very good quest to get out of the way. The buffs to Skarbrand are decent. The big thing is the decreased recruitment cost and the loot. Plus, it makes him get stronger the more thing he kills. And Skarbrand is a lord quite capable of annihilating armies on his own. So let's talk about his faction stuff, which replenish enforced territory, campaign movement, and reduced diplomatic relations. He's quite an interesting character in the sense that the replenishment in foreign territory is amazing. I'm just going to point that out. In terms of stuff, Root Marcher into Blood Feast. Might want to snag some points into Spoiler if you're concerned at all about economy. Otherwise, Serve or Die is pretty decent. I would not worry about Khorne corruption at all the entire game. I've never had problems having too much Khorne corruption. And any revolts that pop up in your province because of lack of corruption, that's just more skulls and money for you to kill. You actually like revolts. What I wouldn't give for a Slaanesh building that reduces public order. It would be great. Unholy Resilience is just solid because it means Skarbrand will heal almost every battle, and if he dies, he comes back to the battlefield even faster. Over here, though, Sustained by Slaughter is almost a necessity. Grab it, 9% decreased upkeep. Then the next point you have to spend probably into Bloodletting, just get you some more skulls, not much. Claimer of Souls is again almost needed. The movement, recruitment, and more importantly, the upkeep. All told, that's 15% cheaper. That is really good on a faction that suffers a bit from economy. The red line, this is where you really need to think about what type of units you're going to use, and you kind of got to commit to it early on, or at least reasonably early on. Because your armies are small, it is worth going down the red line fairly early on. So if you're going to use Bloodletters and Blood Crushers, definitely get Skull Takers. The additional melee attack, they have 38 additional 6 plus there was a technology that gave them like 5 more twice. That would put them around 45 to even 55 melee attack. Overall, they're really really solid units, plus the increased charge bonus is nice as well. If you're going to obviously do human units, the armor and melee defense means your Chaos Warriors become absolutely juggernauts on the battlefield, hard to kill, reasonably hard hitting. If you're going to flank, use this. I wouldn't. Hellforged, I wouldn't really do this unless you're going to use a lot of these units. Harbingers of Death is an arguable one, though. It makes your Minotaurs stronger, but you have to get to level 4 settlements really to start using those anyway. Kill for Khorne, though, is worth getting. It's why I say go down the red lines. It buffs all your allies in an area with more melee attack and leadership. Skarbrand should be right in the heart of a battle at all times. This will make his units a lot stronger. Khorne's Chosen probably is the best one out of these, especially seeing the range of units it covers is really good. Outside of that, the other ones are, in my opinion, somewhat disappointing. You have to put 1 point there, and then you get Kill for Khorne, Revel and Slaughter. You upgrade Kill for Khorne, Revel and Slaughter. It's just a flat upkeep. Keep almost doubles it. Makes your melee units super strong. At some point, Skarbrand's Tier 3 here will unlock. This one, Rampage. It's great to use on enemy units. Can pull them out of formation, allow for flanking, tying up units, focusing lords, forcing them to just attack people is really useful. And that's an upgrade from his base ability. It has an increased range. I think that's the big change. Yeah, that's the big change. Just increased range. So it's not super great, but then it gives you movement range after winning a battle. Combined with Skull Throne and the other movement buffs, you can get a ton of movement range afterwards, especially if you get range when you sack settlements. You will be racing around the map as if you're on rocket boots like crazy. Wrathful Reaper, always good for him. You use it, he goes nuts, but his weapon damage and armor piercing, which is already 600 weapon strength, becomes absolutely monstrous. If you're in a duel with a lord, pop this, he will just kill lords. There's very few lords that can stand up to Skarbrand in melee combat. A fight between him and Nikari is hilarious because they're both monstrous units. Drinker of Blood, snag this. I would honestly probably snag this first out of this second tree just for the regen. Healing yourself at melee is hard to overstate how strong it is. Anarchy of Madness, probably the last one you snag here. Control, Corruption. You're going to be destroying the settlements rather than having them revolt, so it's kind of useless, and I've never had trouble with Corruption. Locus of Endless Wars. Again, more movement after winning battles. Plus 25, and your blood hosts and your entire faction get stronger. Once you get this, you just explode onto the map. You're going to get it around rank 18, at which point you'll start rampaging around. You win a battle, you get a blood host. Your blood host is expensive. It's a full army. You'll send it out, it'll die, but it'll kill things. Honestly, you can get by with Skarbrand as your sole lord, maybe one for defense, and then just use blood hosts everywhere. Up top, spell resistance, missile resistance, makes an already tanky unit even tankier. Hate Slanesh. If you're fighting Slanesh, use, otherwise don't. Now, Skarbrand's yellow line is super strong, and some people will probably get annoyed saying don't go down it early. I find it's much better to have an army that can fight and hold out without having to just use your lord. Plus, Skarbrand already is a super powerful fighter. But if you want to, This can turn him into a 1 unit army. Weapon strength initially. Then I would go for Slaughterer. Adds an additional 10% physical damage. All told, with his healing, his combat ability, and physical resistance, he will almost never die in melee combat without fighting like lords. Afterwards, I would not get destroy. I'd probably do kill for the additional melee defense, make him that much harder to hit. Maim, every single one of these increases weapon strength. If you want him to always be able to hit, is a good one. I wait till usually I finish the tree and then go back through it. Bellow of Endless Fury, it's not magic. It's just a magic missile that's not magic. Adds some much needed magic damage to the faction to cast at range. Explosion, it's pretty strong. Be aware he can't use it while in combat, but you throw it into the enemy before fighting or to hit enemies a distance away. Outside of that, you've got a combination of other ones. I honestly would go Crush, get that charge bonus, send them into the enemy lines, absolutely trample them, then Cleave for the weapon strength. I don't feel the need to give him hit points early on. He's pretty tanky, and once he gets regen, he's even harder to take out. Speed is nice, but not game breaking. And finally, Fueled from Rage, just if he gets low hit points, he hits significantly harder. Always a solid stuff. Overall, Skarbrand is probably in the top 5 or 6 melee lords in combat. He's pretty strong. Sadly, despite the wings, he can't fly though. And the counter to his army is ranged and spells despite his spell resistance. So be aware of fighting strong range units. Like elves, wood elves. They're pretty powerful. And enjoy, because Khorne is the bloodiest and most skull-obsessed lord in the game. It's all about fighting. If you're at peace, you're playing the faction wrong. It is okay to get a couple non-aggression packs with people you're not fighting early on. These guys down here tend to want non-aggressions because they're getting killed by dwarves. Sometimes other Beastmen factions, the Beastmen factions will want non-aggression. Be aware that they are going to betray you and attack you at some point. But in the short run, taking out your enemies until you can get enough money to build up Death Gorge to actually make some money and support better units, totally a legitimate strategy. And that is the Exiles of Khorne, Skarbrand, the Khorne faction, how to play it, fight a lot, gather lots of skulls, pour the enemy's blood out on the sands of Nekara, and have fun. It's really fun. Honestly, the biggest disappointment with it is the economy and the fact that at some point you'll get tired of all the fighting, in my opinion. But have fun. And that is it. If you did watch this all, please do leave a like, leave a comment if you have something interesting to say, if I screwed up horribly. And subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see more guides or other stuff. And thank you all for watching. I do appreciate it. And I will see you all in another guide or video. Bye for now.